And Toronto, Interstate Stream Commission.
Jared Tykus, Sierra Club.
Holly Copeland, New Mexico Gas.
Steve Hernandez, Carlsbad Irrigation District. Jerry Melendez, Bureau of Reclamation.
Thank you all very much, and welcome to the regular board meeting of the LPU Irrigation District. I will note that Director Gillis is not present. Dr. Lack, I believe you had.
Yes, Dwayne, as we lost a cousin and a dear friend, Jimmy Lytle, in our North Valley today. They have his funeral. He's part of that process, and he said he sure would like to be here today, but because of that, he could not make it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lack. That brings us to the approval of the board minutes. Board minutes for April 12th. Were sent to board members. Are there any corrections to be noted in the minutes? Hearing none, the president would accept the motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Second. I have a motion by Mr. Frank Salpeck and a second by Mr. Sam Calhoun to approve the board minutes. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, discussion is closed. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Any opposed? Being the president, the ayes have, the motion carries. That brings us to the calendar of events. Mr. Esler.
Yes, sir. I'm gonna leave the irrigation schedule for Dr. King and James Narvaez to explain to you the startup dates. And certainly right now on your calendar, you'll see that there's not much going on outside of our beginning of our irrigation season that has already started in Patch. And now we'll begin in this central and south areas. So I'll leave it to them to go over that schedule, when released, when we're diverting, and how we're going to operate during that release to the district farmers. Other than that, sure, that's it.
Thank you very much, Ms. Eslinger. I had probably missed it. So when we at the last board meeting, the board discussed hiring an interim manager. The board in closed session deliberated on what our potential options were for an interim manager over the next year as we move through the process of hiring a new treasurer manager, as well as discussions about reorganizing the management structure of the district. In that discussion, it was the board requested me to ask Mr. Eslinger if he was available to step in and serve as the interim manager for a period of not more than 12 months. Mr. Eslinger agreed to that, and so he is here today as the interim manager. The board will have some additional work to do in stating the scope of work that we expect Mr. Eslinger to be doing over the next year, as well as verifying his compensation. So with that, Gary, I appreciate you being willing to come in and help with keeping the water flowing over the next year.
Thank you. I'm honored, I'm humbled, and I'm hopeful for a great irrigation season.
Thank you very much. That brings us to the water resources report. Dr. King.
Okay, give me just a minute here. Let me get what I was set up. Okay. Okay, well, I'm going to be all out of character again today, as you are no doubt aware. There's a lot of water up there and a lot of water coming down. So let's get right to it. This is our storage as of May 8th, and I picked May 8th because the two districts and reclamation had an allocation meeting yesterday based on conditions midnight on the 8th. So these are the numbers I'm presenting. Fortunately, they're changing pretty fast. As you see down there at the bottom, we're getting in about 6,000 acre feet per day right now. That's net inflow into Elephant Butte Reservoir. But at any rate, we had 461 in Elephant Butte, about 56 in Caballo, for a total project storage of 517. little bit of compact credit water. That's because Colorado finished the year with a credit balance of 200 acre feet, and a little bit of it's evaporated. By the way, if you want to know how to look, if you want to know how to make compact deliveries, look at Colorado. They are phenomenal at it. San Juan Chama, there's 3,800 in there, so that comes out. So we've got usable project storage of about 513,000. Now, this usable project storage is a little bit significant. It doesn't change our strategy or anything, but my understanding is that when that usable project storage, which is now 513, goes over 600,000, Mexico will go to a full allotment of 60,000 acre feet. What that means is that this is not considered an extraordinary drought that would result in a reduction of Mexico's allocation. At 6,000 acre feet per day, that's before the next board meeting. 6,000 acre feet per day, sorry. That's before the next board meeting. We've got about 1,800 that is not releasable. That's basically the reserve pools in Elephant Butte and Caballo, 10,000 in Elephant Butte and 12,000 in Caballo. As of the 8th, we had released about 3,095 acre feet. That is released from Caballo to Percha Dam, where it is all diverted into the Array Canal, and we're running our upper system only. So it's a dry river, basically from Percha down, all the way down. That means we've got a seasonal supply of about 498,000, call it 500,000. And we are gaining 600 or 6,000 acre feet per day. And the change from last month, notice typically when I report the change from last month, a pretty good month is 40,000. Here we've changed 122,000 since my last report to you. So it's definitely coming on down. Speaking of the allocation that we did yesterday, this is with a diversion ratio of 0.84 and a drought reduction factor of 0.92, which is assuming that we're going to release at least 400,000 acre feet. And I think from those numbers you saw, that's a pretty safe assumption. Same seasonal supply you just saw, that gives Mexico an allocation of 35,000 right now. Keep in mind that when we hit 600,000 usable, that will go to 60,000, but nobody is going to be deallocated water because we are gaining it so fast that the additional allocation to Mexico will be taken up in the inflow. Now of that seasonal supply, we've got 343,000 that are 2023 water. That is water for the current year's allocation. That's the number. Oh, and by the way, I'm reporting these in this order because this is the order in which the allocation procedure works. First, we allocate water to Mexico, then we allocate based on D1, then we allocate water to EP1 based on D2 with the drought factor applied, then we allocate water to EBID. So 343,000 is still far short of a full D2 allocation of 790, or even the point at which D2 goes essentially max, or essentially full, which is 764,000. But it's better than we had in recent years. We are moving up on the D2 curve, which means that the diversion ratio built into the D2 curve is significantly higher than the 0.84 that I'm assuming here. So that's why we're not allocating this year's water 5743, because we're off the D2 curve with it. EP1's going in with about 72,000 acre feet of carryover, so they're total at 131. And my understanding is that they allocated, was it 2.5? Yeah, the EP1 allotment is at 2.5 feet, and that's based on the prior allocation, I understand. EBID had 58,000 acre feet of carryover. we get 121,000, 122,000 of this year's water. That's about 48% of the US share of the allocation of this year's water. So we're right about 180,000. And if we run that through the mill, that comes out with spreading that out over 90,640 acres with an assumed 55% conveyance efficiency. That leaves us at 13 inches allotable in the bank right now. But keep in mind, it's water's coming in at 6,000 acre feet per day. So that can change quickly. Okay, now this next one is a slide I've been waiting to show for a long time. And that's the river upstream. And on this, the blue bars are the current flow as of yesterday, late afternoon, evening. The red line you read off the right axis, the right vertical axis, is the percentage of normal. And now the purple bars are the average flow for that day of that time of year. And the purple bars are almost always way over the blue bars. We're always running below average, but here we are running 170 to 185% of average up and down the river. That's a nice place to be, even for me. To give you some idea of what it's looking like up in the middle Rio Grande, this is the Rio Grande near Alameda. It's the El Paseo, still in Las Cruces mode, Paseo del Norte bridge over the river. And you see that it, since our last meeting, it has gone up from about 1,000 CFS, which is 2,000 acre feet per day since our last meeting there. I rode my bike down there on Saturday, and this is what it was looking like off the bridge. You'll notice that the channel is full. In fact, it is spilling into the bosque. It's not really flowing. It was not really flowing through the bosque when I was there, but it was starting to seep over in sort of backwater type flows and submerging a lot of the trails and things. So it's definitely running full. It's not, I don't believe that it is presenting as much of a threat to levees and things as we had in 2019. And in fact, while it's a great year, it's not quite 2019 all over again. This is what the total precipitation as a percentage of average in the snow water equivalent as of yesterday was at the first reading of the day. You'll notice the snowpack is still pretty well above average. There's snow still to come down, which is a good thing. It means that we can expect these high flows to be sustained for a while. The Sangre de Cristos are pretty well done. The Jemez is done. You all saw the flooding on the news, I'm sure, coming out of the Jemez. It was sort of a flash in the pan there. Our precipitation has slipped a bit since total precipitation has slipped since last month. It's basically been, we had a very good up to April, and then things did slow down, and that's reflected through the hydrologic outlook here. This is the snow water equivalent still in the Rio Grande headwaters, which is everything above everything upstream of the state line, the Colorado state line. And it's concentrated very much on the west side of the valley in the San Juan Mountains. You see there is still quite a bit of snow to go. Looking just at a high elevation and a late peaking site, this is Wolf Creek, and you see that it very much appears to have peaked. I don't expect to see anything more except a rapid downward swing. You'll notice that it peaked a little bit early, and it is declining pretty fast right now. But again, there's a lot of snow. It's still above the annual, or still at roughly the annual median snowpack, the peak annual snowpack, even though we are past peak time of year. On the NRCS forecasts, this has gotten, I'm reporting on these from the current month through July. So last month I reported April through July. These aren't exactly comparable because the medians have changed because it's later in the year. The medians go down for the runoff. Instead of looking at April, May, June, July, we're only looking at May, June, July now. But still, they have gone down slightly from a little bit less optimistic, I guess I would say, than last month's forecast. But still, as you see on the percentages there, we stand a very good likelihood of breaking 100%, even 150%. I will say that on the 2019 forecasts, the actual was out here in the 30% range. So if we do get similar performance to 2019, we're actually looking at pretty good remaining runoff. But again, who knows these days? It's harder and harder to predict. These are the May 15th to 19th outlooks. And it's interesting, these were the most recently issued ones. They were issued May 9th. So I got them the day they came out. Most of the other forecasts came out back in April. But you'll notice that they are forecasting above average precipitation and roughly neutral to slightly cool temperatures throughout the watershed, which kind of surprised me. I was expecting hot and dry. I'm not quite sure where this is coming from, but I'll show you what I think may be starting to influence the thinking, at least on the precipitation. On the drought monitor, this is from last month. And again, we had some abnormally dry reaches, but basically the Rio Grande Basin was out of drought conditions. And that continues in the current month, not a whole lot of change. Still some pretty tough times up there in the Oklahoma Panhandle and Kansas, but we are, at least according to the drought monitor indicators, in reasonably good shape drought wise, which hopefully that's based on a lot of things like soil moisture that would indicate that we'll get a decent runoff with the remaining snow. Now, here's where it gets interesting. We always kind of take a look at the El Nino cycle. This is what El Nino is doing now. And I know for a lot of you new ones, you may not be accustomed to this graph, but it packs a whole lot of information into one picture. What you have here is on the horizontal axis, that is going from the equatorial Pacific in Indonesia to the equatorial Pacific in Ecuador, South America. So we're looking across the equatorial Pacific 5 degrees north and 5 degrees south. And we got time coming down the vertical axis. So it's all looking at the equator. Up does not mean north and down does not mean south. It means time going from last year up to this year. And what you see is this very persistent La Nina, which sat there for like 3 years, suddenly is very much breaking down. And in fact, they're predicting a 62% chance of El Nino developing in May through July of 2023. And considering the immediacy of that, that's pretty quick. We could be in El Nino for our monsoon season, which is always interesting. There are some forecasts that our Atlantic hurricane season won't be too awfully bad this year, but one never knows. A good El Nino with a hurricane, we can have another 2008 type event coming up, who knows? But the interesting thing is this is changing. It's changing pretty rapidly. And we're better than equal chance now of getting into El Nino before or during our monsoon season this summer. So in summary, we had the initial release 6 a.m. on May 1st. That went down to Percha, diverted into the Array Canal, and I believe we ran one, James can talk about this, into the Percha Private. The main release then to Leesburg and Mesilla and parts south is planned for May 12th. And Mexico, as I said, will likely go to 60,000 acre feet. That's two, not top, 260,000 acre feet in the June allocation. We didn't do it just yet because we're not there, and we try to take things in the order in which they come. We do have current allotment or current water allocated to us to make a 13-inch allotment with what we've got right now. And it's increasing at the inflow is increasing about 6,000 acre feet per day. Not our allocation, but the net inflow into Elephant Butte Reservoir. Now, this is where we need to think a little bit about strategy, because what's going to determine how much water we get out, how much water we want to allot to our farmers is probably going to be governed by how much they can use by the end of the season, how much we can deliver by the end of the season. So the end of the season is one consideration, but also the FDR limitations. And certainly in the Mesilla Valley, we're getting a late start. It's a late start even in the Rincon. You know, we'd want to come on in mid-March, but that certainly didn't happen. So folks had to start out their season pumping, and we remember 2019, and I didn't catch if Ryan Serrano was there, but I'm sure he remembers 2019 too, because he had a lot of over diversions to deal with. What we're looking at really is trying to get as much surface water out there without putting people in trouble with their combined surface water, groundwater, FDR, as dictated by Stream System Issue 101 final judgment. And we will likely have carryover, possibly even from some spill from the El Paso Irrigation District. That is, they could fill their carryover account and spill some. We'll have to see, you know, it's not quite as compelling as 2019 was, but we're in a range where we could have some spill from their account into ours, but they'll probably be starting with a full carryover account next year. Now, what I guess I am saying is we've got 13 in the bag and it's coming in quickly. And I would not recommend against a 14-inch allotment at this point. So let me say that what you as the board need to consider is how much water you want to allot with these constraints. Water supply, which is kind of a slack constraint right now, but end of season and FDR limitations. And with that, I would take any questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. King. Are there any questions from the board?
No, Mr. Chairman, but if I may,
Dr. Fox?
I would ask if Mr. Serrano has an opinion or perspective in terms of what he is seeing at this juncture in the season relative to the FDR.
Yeah, so thank you, Eric. I would definitely encourage the board to do 14-inch allotment, irrespective of the FDR limitations. You know, we will do what we need to do to help the farmers work through those issues. We certainly don't want to penalize farmers for the good fortune of having additional water. So what we'll do is we'll consult with the engineer to see what we can do for those people that do end up in that situation where they go, and we'll work with them through the summer and at the end of the year to make sure we don't, you know, arbitrarily penalize somebody for that good fortune.
Thank you, Mr. Serrano. That's a very encouraging perspective from my perspective.
Thank you, Dr. Fox. I concur, and I appreciate the cooperation with the state engineer. We worked through a very dynamic water year. both ensuring compliance and maximizing the beneficial use of the water that's available. Thank you for that cooperation. Mr. Lack.
What I'd like to do is ask some of my colleagues here, how are they doing on their pumping? Are they, you know, up in Hats, the problem is we get this water late, we get 14 inches, it's gonna be hard to use it all. Especially as the guy, for sure the guys with drip, you know, we're part of that same group, but how are y'all, what are y'all's thoughts? I mean, I love water, love canal water. Can y'all, or you get, Steve, how are you on your water tank? You'll be able to use 14 inches pretty good.
Other thoughts on that?
I saw 14, just depends, you know, like cotton and stuff, you get a lot of rain, yeah, but you know, that's guessing, so you know, like I said, it's gonna be winter, but we don't know that, but 14, why not put it out there and try to use it, you know, we don't know what the end date will be, you know. Start putting it out right now, I think they're start irrigating mostly, well, cotton won't start to wet. June, July, I don't know, I'm out of that business.
I would just add, you know, one of the major considerations, and I think what Ryan is speaking to, and I'm sure you've heard Eric a number of times say this, but the more surface water we can get out there, the more recharge we get, the less groundwater pumping we get. It's the same, you know, when we're short of water, it's kind of a death spiral because you get less recharge and more groundwater pumping at the same time. So that's the proverbial double whammy. Well, the double whammy works in reverse. And so, you know, if we can get water out there, stretch our season at all, you know, we hope to work with the state to try to come out with ways to do that, because one thing we're all about, I think everybody in this game, from EBID to the state engineer to El Paso #1, wants to see aquifer recovery happen here.
And one more thing to thank all the board members and stuff that we did get the start hatch a little bit early. That really does help on making our onions, you know, we're gonna get a couple irrigations, maybe 3 on our drip on that. Unmeasurably, you know, difference in size and quality. Thank you. And as it worked out, as he said, it was a good plan. It fit good. So thank you.
Well, it's certainly good for you, and it's good for the district.
Mr. Salbeck.
It helps the underground, you know, really does. When you start putting more on that, because I see it in drains, they start coming up pretty fast.
Improves the diversion ratio.
Huh? Yeah. So. You need a motion, or what do we need, or
So
anybody else?
we could entertain a motion at this time. My recommendation would be that we hear from Mr. Narvaez first, so that we understand the constraints of the system, and ensure that we're not
That's good.
moving forward on an allotment that he would struggle to deliver. Are there further questions for Dr. King? Hearing none, thank you very much, Dr. King. Mr. Narvaez.
Thank you.
Good morning, members of the board. First, I'll start with the quick summary of the startup in the hatch area. Of course, we released May 1st. We started off with the 500 CFS released for about an hour. We went to 1,000 CFS for 2 hours, and then we brought it right back down to 200 CFS, which basically stabilizes that pool in the area so that we could divert the water. So right at about 9:30 or so on May 1st, we actually put the 200 CFS into the array. It took us a couple days to balance out the swell of the pool so we could minimize any of the water going over the spillway. But after a couple days, we had to readjust the order to kind of get it so we had equal there, whatever we're pulling in or releasing, we're actually getting into the system. So we're able to meet that target. Early diversions went pretty well. The demand wasn't as high because it's just starting off and the farmers are just starting to look and see the water out there. We had our first weekend dip where we did lose demand over the weekend, which is unfortunate. It's common everywhere. But on the weekend, we did lose a little bit of demand this past weekend. So we're struggling a little bit to keep that order maintained. Again, come Monday morning, we had more demand than we could deliver. So we're in a spot where had some farmers, a little upset or concerned that we weren't able to meet their demand on Monday. It's understandable. We can't release just a 20 CFS boost from Caballo. So if we would have released 20, you just can't do it 20 CFS, you wouldn't be able to get it in there. So what we try to do is to monitor that pool up there, make sure that we have enough push. And we pulled some gates, opened some more gates. Even today, we opened some more gates to try to get more water in there. If we do look like we're dropping a little bit, that at least give me a little bit better range to increase the actual release for Caballo, maybe to about 250 to fill us back up in there. But right now, I think we're starting to meet our demand again. We did have a bad couple days just because everybody on Monday morning wanted to get their water Monday morning first thing. But we're back on delivery and on track there. So, what's going to really help us is Friday when we open that canal, and then we can stuff all the water we can to meet demand on the array. Thus also starting the pumps down below on the recon. That's another reason why the demand is kind of rough, because we have all the water down south. It's hard to get water up north. And that's why the blessing of having the river pumps accessible really helps us up there. Right now, we went back to old style operations, which has been hard to do. A lot of drips. They do take up quite a bit of time, a lot of storage in the canals, a lot of adjustments, but we're working through all that. And I anticipate that come Friday, as soon as we get the full order, we're going to bump up on the array and we're going to just push that water out there. So all in all, though, I think it was a successful start, kind of how we planned it. So we did good there. We irrigated approximately 2,300 acres during this run, approximately 1,200 acre feet charged out. So that's a pretty good efficiency after we got going. The first couple of days are usually a wash just because of the flushing. We did divert 4,000, so the efficiency is on the lower end, but anticipate that picking back up once we get better water in there, and then we can start pushing the diversion a lot better. With that, before I go to the, I guess I could just jump to the flat rate, I guess, because right now is where we need to get that approval. And this is just going off of the last board meeting allocation or allotment, which was 12 inches. So I've looked at some dates and we're settled on a couple scheduling dates. We're looking at 2 irrigations. June 3rd and 4th is the first one that I'm recommending. And July 8th and 9th is the second. At this time, no recommendation for a third flat rate, and unless there's something different happening with the allocation or the allotment, excuse me. So right now, we're looking at 2 irrigations. Again, June 3rd and 4th, and July 8th and 9th. And I'd like to get approval to push that out and spread the word.
Thank you, Mr. Narvaez. Questions for Mr. Narvaez?
James, one thing I need to know, because I've been asked a lot this week, of course, like you say, everybody, the water was there and then what it is. What is the maximum amount of water you put in that main?
We could probably get up towards 280.
Because I thought somewhere around 300, because
Yeah.
I didn't want to be a liar. And I knew it was,
Yeah.
I know right now we're just running 2 to keep the deal from going over, but at the same time, I was wondering kind of what the max was.
It's not so much the 200. We might be able, we probably could have gotten up to 250. The problem is we have a couple things working against us on the top end. Is we have some through heel irrigations, and they're really choking up what we can put in. Because the through heel,
Yeah,
pretty well. When we put in the through heel,
You gotta
it's
fix
right
it.
on the road. I mean, it's hard to get that push, and you don't have the push at the dam, it's gonna choke up. So we're trying to balance that without letting it go over the top and try to make sure it's kind of, and the through heel's been one of our bigger killers there. I'll be honest with you. That's the one. Once we put that through heel in for the irrigations, which finished last night. So now we're popping them up to pull it. But that was one of the,
For all you do, but
Yeah.
I've had 4 or 5 farmers call me in the last day or two, because everybody does the same. Why don't you take the darn water on the weekend when it was offered to them? And then, of course, everybody Monday morning, men missing, you have that trouble. But thank you for that, because that's the biggest question I've been asked. how much can they put in there? And I said, man, depends on the flow of the ditch. You know,
Yeah.
if you're running a heavy end, and I even said that, you gotta hold the water upstream to get it out. You can't push it on fast. So, but I didn't know the answer, but thank you. 280 is the answer.
Yeah, I mean, we've been able to put 300, 320, depending on where it's located. But 280 is a good spot that we normally maintain a 280 CFS.
Thank you, Jim.
And that's full irrigations.
Thank you, Mr. Lack. Additional questions from Mr. Narvaez?
Mr. Chairman,
Dr. Fox?
James, is there any sort of like an infrastructure type of an adjustment or change that would help you with that issue?
Of the percha, going over the percha or what in general, excuse me. I guess.
Well, I mean, in as far as, you know, I understand the limitation, what with, you know, the staggered release, you know, with hatch coming on early, which hydrologically makes a lot of sense to me, but is there any sort of, you know, physical addition or improvement or something that you can think of, you know, canal wise or related that would help you with that?
We definitely need to take a better look at the drip operation. We have to figure out a better way to provide the drip, the amount of pressure they need, because a lot of the drips come straight from the canal. So with that being said, we have to fill up canals and hold up water there to reach a certain elevation so the drips can operate efficiently. So we've talked strategy before of making areas where we can actually fill up a distribution box or something to get the water so we don't have to maintain such a high level all the time.
Okay,
So that part of the drips will help. The demand, that's just gonna happen with what happens there. Yeah, there's some things that can be improved, especially the drip portion of it, especially the Garfield lateral. We have to maintain that thing pretty full, and it causes a lot of, to back up water, fills up pools, and it's hard to get going on there, so.
I got you.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like, yeah, there may be some engineering opportunities to try to help you out.
I agree. I think we've talked about the drips before and how we can adapt to that, because it is efficient for the farmer. We got to make it efficient for delivery too, so.
Thank you, Dr. Fox.
Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Etzel?
James, I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Is there data on the percentage of people who take the flat rate water who are eligible and actually use it?
Whew, that's been a big one for a while. Flat rates, I'll be honest with you, we do our best to try to maintain who's taking what, and it's the same, let's put it that way. I guess that's the best way to say it. The same amount of people take the same amount of water. There's not a whole lot of new ones. There's just some trouble spots and choking spots, but I'll get you a better presentation for flat rate so you can understand how that whole thing works. Because it is it's complicated in certain areas. Some areas like in the array, real easy to do. They're right off main ditches, those kind of things. But when you get to flat rates here in town and in Old Mesilla, where our biggest problems are, it's hard to get everybody because everybody just opens up and those kind of things. But I'll definitely come up with a flat rate presentation for you. Okay.
Thank you, Jim.
Yes.
Ms. Esslinger, I have something we're working on is we're trying to develop more of our flat rate irrigators into community ditch associations, because once you set up a community ditch association, you turn it over to a Maridomo on that community ditch, and then he waters all the small tracts instead of us just opening the turnout, because our ditch riders can't go on personal property. And so if we can organize community ditches, which we have several working, and they work fine, because then you place the order. And also, if they're all contiguous, they can order as a farm rate. And so we take the pressure off the flat rate weekends by allowing these community ditch associations to irrigate off the flat rate weekend. And it gives less pressure on farmers or on our riders to set the head for those flat raters. It doesn't work everywhere, but we're finding that if we can organize those community ditch associations, it does work.
I guess a good presentation would be how much, what percentage of that flat rate ends up on the streets and the roads? It's quite a bit.
Mr. Calvin.
James, is there some communication between EP1 and us on the flat rate weekend because of what happens at the tail end when the El Paso flat rates go on and we're going?
Yes, sir, that's correct. The flat rates, since they have a lot more flat rates than we do, I did work with them to come up with kind of the best scenario schedule. Yeah, so June 3rd and 4th, we won't be interfering with any kind of flat rate weekend that week, but we're gonna overlap a little bit on the 8th and 9th. But that's also to get us out of the holiday weekend. I'm trying to avoid some of those weekends that cause us a lot of trouble, for people being out of town. So yeah, I did coordinate with EP number 1 on those dates to make sure we can kind of target what's more efficient there.
Additional questions for Mr. Narvaez?
James, to follow up on some of that Dr. Eric was talking about. Right now, all these guys that do the drip, including myself, we just pull it out of that system, gravity flow. I think with our new money, maybe one of the projects that might happen, if, because the farmers, I think, would be agreeing with this, is to have them suck out of the ditch with the pump. And it can suck off the bottom. You don't have to hold it off the top, number one. That would sure help. Like my cousin Doug, who's a pecan farmer, who has to sit wait for Shane to do all that irrigating. You know, and you know where the problem is.
Yes,
there.
yes.
If that ditch was a way where Shane could suck out of the, you know, and I, with this new money, maybe we can do some of that and pull that to that station. That, like, we went from letting our pumps go in the ditch and pulling it again and going directly through our drip stations. You see the difference?
Yes,
It saved us immeasurably time and immeasurably amounts of water that, because for a system before, you gotta keep dumping over the top.
yes,
But if you're pulling out of it, it will be only what that pulls, and it ought to be not just from the drip station, from that area that's full, but maybe from the canal, from a sunken spot, kind of like we have our pumps down there pulling into our system, something like that. If, as we engineer, I think Eric could sure do something like that, or our engineer here, those would be great helps. And then it's on the farmer to pump it out there, not you to hold the water.
yeah, no, I think part of the infrastructure definitely have to do it, especially on that one of those laterals that are high drip, which can tie up every, you know, the whole system. So yeah, definitely we should look at engineering some type of a way to, you know, adapt to those drips for sure.
Thank you, Mr. Lang. Thank you, Mr. Narvaez.
Mr. President, Board Member Lack, one of the things I want to clarify related to the quote unquote new money, bipartisan infrastructure law and Inflation Reduction Act money are out. There are multiple programs where we can tap into it, some of it grant funding, some of it otherwise. And so when you're talking in terms of that new money, we will be adjusting our infrastructure package annually to remove things that are already funded and add to things that need to be funded. So one of the reasons why we announced at growers meetings earlier this year to get your projects, your maintenance and construction project ideas to us by July was so that we have time going into the next fiscal year to look at what projects we should be pushing under bill, under IRA, and then looking at grant opportunities otherwise. There's state funds that we could leverage in part of this. For the most part, that is just getting going. We haven't really made a lot of progress in how the state funds will be put into this, but as far as how EBID and the federal government will be spending money, that is further along. And we know we're going to need to bring more projects to the table by fall of this year. So if there are those big projects that create efficiencies for the whole district, by, you know, making particular farmers or particular laterals more efficient, then we need to know about those up front very soon. That was the number one reason we asked for the July deadline this year.
Thank you, Ms. Saltek. Any other questions from the board for Mr. Narvaez? Mr. Dresslinger.
James,
Yes, sir.
everybody wants to know when the water will be in Las Cruces.
Yeah.
When it'll be at Leesburg and when it'll be in Mesilla. Can you kind of give a prediction of what you think it will be if we release on 6 o'clock on Friday?
Yes, sir, I sure will. Right now, the plan, regardless of the any announcement or any additional allotment, the plan is to release on Friday. We will release approximately 2,400 CFS. In that, we'll include all the orders for the rest of the valley, including Leesburg, Mesilla, east side, west side, a bump on the array. and then also Texas and Mexico. So we'll be releasing around 1,200 CFS, about 6 o'clock in the morning on Friday. We will let that water run through the system. We anticipate it's probably going to hit Leesburg, not in Leesburg, but in the Leesburg diversion around Saturday evening, Saturday afternoon, somewhere around there. That water will then build up at Leesburg, go over the spillway, and then make its way down to Mesilla, which we anticipate it's going to hit Mesilla Dam around Sunday. And from there, we're going to let the water push on down as we get closer to the state line, where then once everybody's comfortable with the travel time and the ball of water, and we're accounting for everything that's being released, then at that time, we will put in the Mesilla Dam diversion and go from there. Now, talking in our allocation meeting yesterday, we will probably divert water for the first time in Leesburg on Tuesday. This is all based off the models. Could be that the water's moving extremely fast, which is a possibility, and we may release water in on Monday. But right now, the target date is Tuesday, which is the 16th. From there, within that system, it'll be used for flushing for the next 1 or 2 days until we get everything stabilized there, and then we'll be ready for diversion within 2 days. As far as Mesilla, I would anticipate it would be a day later, which would be that Wednesday. So that would be on the east side and west side canals, we will divert water on Wednesday, the 17th. Again, about 2 days of flushing. So we should be diverting water by that Friday, or delivering water by that Friday to farmers.
So you're anticipating Sunday afternoon, Los Menos, Las Cruces, it'll be flying. to
Yeah.
Las Cruces.
For those, I mean, the majority of the calls we get about the release is they want a picture, take a picture of the release. So yeah, Sunday is probably the day they're going to be at Picacho, looking La Llorona and all those parks. Yes.
Mr. Solbeck.
I just want to say, it's going to be interesting to see how the water goes through our forest there by the interstate. That'll slow it down quite a bit. I don't think there's a channel there. In Albuquerque, and some of the flowing, they'll probably overflow the banks right there. Depends how much you put in.
Where is that?
Right south of the interstate.
Oh,
Yeah, I mean, that's a forest.
yeah, we got a couple spots that in the models, it predict up to a certain, accuracy until we hit the black holes, we call them. And then we're kind of in limbo, and all of a sudden it pops out, water shows up. So it's there's a couple spots that are like that, and there's going to be more the way that the river looks. You're right. It's gonna. But what we're trying to do this year, and we keep trying to do it every year, and it is part of the plan, is to move the water down closer to El Paso before we even put water in our canals, because what happens is the water seems to be moving good, and they say, pick it up, slow it down, we put it in, and then we slowed it down too much. Now you're gonna have to cut your headings and do all, we want to avoid all that. So that's why I'm trying to get them to just let it keep going down before we even put it into our system, because it's caused us some trouble before, where we start up and then we have to cut back all our canals, we lose all our momentum. So, but we're working through that, and that's the plan, the one that I just explained to you.
Thank you, Mr. Narvaez. Additional questions for Mr. Narvaez?
Mr. Chairman,
Dr. Fox?
no further questions for Mr. Narvaez, but just a comment. I'm trying hard to better understand in the context of connectivity physics, to work with and try to help James with some of these, as we refer to them, holes in the system, particularly where startup is concerned, and being able to better predict connectivity and efficiencies in the system. One of the things that would help me greatly would be additional several deeper nested piezometers. They're expensive, but one of the things Ms. Barncastle and I have talked about is, including some of that sort of infrastructure in the discussions that we're having. I think that that kind of data would would greatly help the understanding of what's going on in depth. I know what's happening in the shallow alluvium. I have that mastered, but what's happening at depth is, it's a lot of guesswork right now, but I'm convinced that that has a lot to do with some of these holes in the system that we have to fill as, you know, we're working through startup. So just a comment, just want to share. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Fox. Any other questions from the board for Mr. Novice? Items of decision before us, we need to discuss if we want to set an increase for the allotment. We also need to discuss whether or not we want to, if we want to accept Mr. Novice's recommendations for the 2 flat rate weekend schedules. I'd like to ask if there's any comments from the public on either of those 2 items. Seeing none, what is the will of the board? I hear a motion from Mr. Solitech to increase the allotment to 14 inches.
Second.
I have a second from Ms. Esslinger. Discussion.
You guys have had some music?
But some of them will, James, you know, I'm sure all of us row croppers who also have pecan trees, that's a no brainer, but some of the drip guys, I mean, but you know, that's the nature of the deal, you know?
Yeah. What
If
is-
we didn't, if we'd known we was gonna get 14 inches, we could have started a little earlier, it would have helped, but hey, man, I appreciate the fact that we got to start early, so I'll just no comment, no comment. Yes, sir.
James?
Yes.
You had talked about the season probably going through August, is that still?
So yes, with the 14-inch allowment, the target would be middle of August for the southern area. The end of the season target would be end of July for the array. So that 2-week difference is basically the 2-week startup difference. So yeah, it'd be the middle of August towards the end of that week, of the last week of August. It just depends on the demand, but that's at the straight numbers that we use in our averages, middle of August with the 14 inches.
Possibility of monsoon tank into September.
Yes, if you start getting a little bit of rains, every day you'd be surprised towards the end, every day you have to cut back, extends, it could be 2 days, it's just the way that it works towards the end of the season. But if we were to stay hard and fast with my averages, and which, you know, that's why it's an average, there's some days where we'll drop down and it'll extend the season. But I like to go worst case scenario because we've had worst case scenarios before without any rain. So, and I'd rather be on that safe side than to be short. So yeah, middle of August would be the end of the season in the southern and central areas.
And just to follow up on that, Dr. King, if you would help correct me if I'm mistaken on the allocation piece of this. Currently, there's allocation to EBID of 180,000 acre feet. Presumably, the allocation will rise to approximately 200,000 acre feet to meet the 14-inch allotment. That's an approximate number. Given a 200,000 acre foot allotment, it's going to take you slightly more than 90 days, probably 100 days to actually get that through the system.
Correct.
And so that puts us late in August. Running at the maximum capacity of the system starting Friday. So any hiccups to that will push that further back. Rain,
Correct.
other reductions in capacity of the system or reductions in supply. So if the monsoon hits the way the ENSO is predicting it could, we could be looking at a season that stretches into the middle of September. Is that reasonable assumptions?
Very reasonable.
And I see Dr. King shaking his head, so I'm assuming that
Right,
that's
no,
not.
I agree, that's a distinct possibility.
And so moving beyond 14 inches, we start running into the real risk of not being able to deliver if you know, situations occur that way. That's how the arithmetic runs in my head, at least. The 14 inches if it doesn't rain at all, and there are no hiccups in the system, we're looking at mid to late August. And then anything else pushes it out from there.
That's correct.
Seeing a lot of nodding heads. Any other discussion from the board on the allotment of 14 inches? This is all.
It's also not just the getting water out issue with raising the allotment after this. It's the over diversion issue with groundwater pumping. So we've had farmers pumping from February to June already. And so you've got to keep in mind that if you raise that allotment any later than now, you're gonna be pushing people up against that threshold.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Alpec. Appreciate that. And I also appreciate the prior comments from Mr. Serrano on being cooperative in looking at solutions there. Other comments? Any comments from the public? Hearing none, discussion is closed. All those in favor of the motion to raise the allotment to 14 inches, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Being the president, the ayes have it, and the motion carries. That brings us to the business of scheduling the flat rate weekends. The recommendation was June 3rd and 4th, and July 8th and
8,
9th.
9.
What is the will of the board?
I move that we accept the weekends that James has recommended for flat rate irrigation.
I have a motion for Mrs. Esslinger for June 3rd and 4th and July 8th and 9th.
Second it.
I have a second from Mr. Lack. Discussion. Any comments from the public? Hearing no discussion is closed. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing the president, the ayes have it, the motion carries. Thank you very much, Mr. Narvaez. So we have set the allotment at 14 inches. We have scheduled 2 flat rate weekends. Brings us to our next order of business, which is engineering. We'll start with maintenance project updates.
Yeah, we're gonna be here today, so.
So do we have a maintenance project update or we?
Not for maintenance, but for engineering, members of the board, Mr. President, this month, we've had a lot of permits come in, no major projects and engineering as yet. We're in the process of losing another engineering member. Anyway, so that's it, business as usual in engineering.
Thank you very much, Ms. Donahue.
All right.
Permits.
Good morning,
There are
everybody.
many of them this morning.
Yes.
What is your recommendation for the process of them? I believe we have nearly 100 renewals.
Yes. So,
Mr. President, they are split out for a reason,
Yeah.
right? So, I would not lump in renewals with your consideration of the new ones, is all I ask for purposes of keeping the minutes clean.
Very good. Questions from the board regarding the process of separating out the renewals from the new permits for construction? Please proceed.
okay, so I'm going to start off with all the new ones that are going to be constructed. All right, so first off, we have 2023-L-075 for New Mexico Gas Company. They're going to construct, operate, and maintain a buried gas line crossing the PHA drain at approximate station 36+00. They're going to be crossing at a very deep. We're requiring a 10-foot minimum in lieu of metal casing. This is a different version compared to the one within your book. They're currently planning to go below 20 feet below the PHA drain above Highway 187. So that is their plan in lieu of metal pipe. They're going extremely deep. Following up, 2023 L076, we have Time Warner Cable. They're going to construct, operate, and maintain an aerial fiber optic line crossing the west drain at 4061+50. And this is going to be here near the Little La Union lateral and the La Union West, right below the intersection of the Little La Union. As you can see, it's right above Mercantile and next to Gabaldon Road. Okay. 2023 L077, we have Comcast Cable. They're going to construct, operate, and maintain an aerial fiber optic line crossing the Picacho Main Canal. And this one is going to be above near Fair Acres Road across the Picacho Main here, right above Interstate 10. Next, we have 2023 LO78, construct, operate, and maintain a buried fiber optic line crossing the drain at 168+00. They will be crossing below 5 feet below the invert with metal encasement. And this is going to be right here through Fair Acres Road as well on the Picacho drain. We have 2023 LO79 for Comcast Cable. They're going to construct, operate, and maintain an aerial fiber optic line crossing the Picacho drain. And this is going to be near Tres Sendas Road off of, I believe this is Calle del Norte. We have 2023-L-080 for Comcast Cable again, to construct, operate, and maintain a buried fiber optic line crossing the Del Rio drain. And this is going to be off of Calle del Norte. We have 2023 L-081 to construct, operate, and maintain an aerial fiber optic line crossing the Picacho drain. We have 2023 L-125 to construct, operate, and maintain a buried fiber optic line crossing the Louisiana at 2875 and 2631. So they will have two crossings near Villa Sombra and here off of Valdez Road. We have 2023-L-126 to construct, operate, and maintain a buried fiber optic line crossing the Mesilla lateral and the Mesilla drain at multiple locations. So as you can see, they're going to be crossing basically 3 crossings within the same area near Glass Road and Calle del Paso. We have 2023-L-127 for Comcast. The construct, operate, and maintain an aerial fiber optic line paralleling the Laguna from 00 to 150 and crossing the Mesilla lateral at 237+28, and to construct, operate, and maintain a buried fiber optic line crossing the Laguna lateral at 610. So the buried line would be here by Tierra Verde Road. And then we're going to have an aerial line paralleling the Laguna here and crossing the Mesilla lateral here by Calle del Paso.
And just to confirm, the Laguna lateral is piped in that section, is that correct?
That is correct, sir. We have 2023-L-128 to construct, operate, and maintain an aerial fiber optic line crossing the Del Rio drain. 2 stations in the Clark lateral at 53+25. So we have 2 crossings in this area near Snow Road and 1 crossing up by Glass Road. We have 2023-L-129 to construct, operate, and maintain a buried fiber optic line crossing the Bogey Spur drain. And this is going to go below Main. So it's going to cross underneath the road and below Bogey Spur drain. And we have 2023-L-130 to construct, operate, and maintain an aerial fiber optic line crossing the Clark lateral at multiple stations. So we have 1 crossing here, 1 crossing here, and another here, all by Paisano and Glass Road. And then we have 2023-L-131 for Comcast as well. Construct, operate, and maintain buried fiber optic line crossing the Mesilla drain. And this is going to be up here near above Apodaca off of Valdez. And we have another 2023-L-133 for Comcast to construct, operate, and maintain an aerial fiber optic line crossing the California lateral at 2 different stationings. And these are going to be off of Snow Road and Calle del Sur. That is the end of the newest ones. I do have the quest renewals as well. There's quite a few. If you have any specific questions on any of those, I can definitely go over any ones that we might have any questions on. Staff does recommend approval of
the new licenses.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation of the licenses. Mr. Saltbeck.
We're gonna
Yes, sir.
put a lot of fiber optics out there that we gotta be careful not hitting, number one.
Yes, sir.
And are they gonna be doing this when the water's in there, or they're gonna wait till winter?
For the buried ones, they're gonna have to wait until afterwards. Aerially, there's not too much of an issue because those are pretty quick to kind of just go over the canals, but buried, they are on hold.
Most of it will be done in November, December, January.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions from the board?
This won't be flag will do it. Back away at night time.
Is there any public comment on the permits?
No, I'm still, I can bear this too.
Dr. Fox?
Is there any particular reason for such a rash, if you will, of crossings? Is there some development going on?
I believe there was an infrastructure bill passed quite some time ago, and they've been tapping into it.
Bipartisan infrastructure law.
Okay,
Same thing we're tapping into, covers every sector
okay,
in the billions of dollars region. So yeah.
gotcha.
Mhm.
Okay,
Yeah, so we have quite a few more from Comcast for this upcoming month already.
I understand. Okay.
Questions from the public on the permits? Hearing none, we'll come back to the board. We'll start with the new construction permits. So we have a total of 15 new construction permits, 14 for fiber optic crossings, and one for a gas line.
That is correct.
Are there any of those permits which any board member would like to vote on separately? Hearing none, I'll accept the motion to approve the 15 permits for new construction listed in the agenda.
So moved. Second.
I have a motion from Mr. Frank Paul Saltbeck and a second from Mr. Steve Lyles to approve the 15 permits for new construction listed in the agenda. Any discussion? Hearing no discussion is closed. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Any opposed? Getting the chair, the ayes have it, and the motion carries. So that brings us to the long list of renewals.
Yes, sir.
Just a quick question.
Yes.
I understand why there's questions and batches like this. Are we expecting additional ones this year?
For the majority, this is the bulk of them. There is a few that we had to kind of still sort out with them, but this is, I would say 90% of them for the renewal, for catching them up with what's expired and renewing any ones that are about to expire.
Very good. Thank you very much. What is the will of the board? Are there any of the renewals which any board member would like to vote on, sir? Mr. Sullivan?
These renewals, are you catching up one that they never reported, or remember you had new renewals and then they forgot some and they put some in, and so everything's caught up with Quest now?
We're catching up for the most part. There's a few that we're still kind of sorting out, but there's still there's still some work going on there. Yeah. Yeah, so there's still some stuff going on. Mhm.
Chairman, Mr. Lang.
Greg, did we ever get an answer on if we hit one of them fiber optics with our backhoe in the middle of the night? Do we still have to pay that? I mean, I don't know if we ever got an answer on that. I mean, now you got a bunch more on there. They're not on my part, but if I was down there like old James, I'd be asking that question. Cause your man gets out there, stop both of them to the morning and call you.
So if you will allow me, Mr. Lack, I would suggest that's out of order because none of the Quest ones are fiber optics, but I would like to come back to your
Okay,
question.
sorry.
Would you mind holding it until?
No, you bet, you bet.
Thank you, Mr. Lack. Any questions regarding the renewals?
So move, make a motion.
So there is a motion on the floor by Mr. Saltbeck to approve the renewals listed in the license list for special use licenses for May, the renewals for Quest. And I have a second for Mr. Nunez. Any discussion? Hearing no discussion is closed. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Being the president, the ayes have it, the motion carries. Mr. Lack, you have a question regarding clarification on.
Yeah, well, this, all these telephone lines, all of it goes through there. Are they,
The fiber, so the Quest lines are telephone lines. So those are,
but they're not fiber optic, just line, telephone.
I did not see any of the renewals that listed fiber optics.
No.
That said, the construction, with the exception of the gas line, 14 of those permits were fiber optics, either buried or area. And I believe your question was, have we got clarification on fines to either EBID or our constituents if one of those lines are inadvertently hit?
I think I kind of would pass that on to Sam. I don't know what are, when it comes to hitting lines.
It depends. I mean, the permit conditions say that they're responsible. But if they can prove a farmer did something malicious or improper or whatever, they're gonna go after the farmer. So it depends. They likely, if it's expensive enough, if it's worth it enough, they will go after someone for it and try to get out of permit conditions, those kind of things. But the permit's pretty clear. It's been this way since before I was around. We've updated our conditions regularly, but the idea is that anybody using our property, if anything happens to their property on it while they're on our property, that's their problem and solely their problem. But as a legal matter, whether that is a shield for a third-party actor on our property, that's a different issue.
Mr. Lack, do you have any follow-up?
No follow.
Thank you, Mr. Lack. Mr. Saleh.
Well, a lot of times, by the time you call the idea, if I have a backhoe out there, why not stop it? I mean, what the heck? Instead of making a 50-foot hole, you plug it out. Now, how deep does it wash to hit that fiber? That's what I'm saying, that we need to put more stuff on the ditches saying it's there.
I warn them.
There's so much expense. Fiber optic is very expensive to hit. And I gotta pay for it, but that goes $500,000. You never know. And I'm trying to help EBID. Myself and EBID. Unless I just want to go back to bed and let water run.
So that would be an example of a situation where EBID would likely use to stand up its permit conditions, the idea of agency theory, right? That the farmer was there quicker than we could have gotten there. We mitigated damages by not having this huge washout that could have destroyed more of their line. We made a mistake in the process. Somebody hit the line. But in that situation, you would likely be claiming as the farmer that I was acting on behalf of EBID and therefore I am protected by EBID's permit conditions. But that's why I'm saying it depends.
Yeah.
Because if you have a drunk irrigator out there digging random holes for no reason, just playing with the backhoe, very different scenario than if you're trying to mitigate damage that's already occurring, right?
Who's the irrigator?
I'm not gonna name names, there are no names, right? It's all hypothetical. But the idea being that it does depend on the circumstances of the situation. This is no different though than, for example, county roads. We're getting sued because of how somebody was injured on a county road that belongs to Doñana County that was on EBID property. We are still getting sued though. So it just depends on the underlying facts of the situation as to whether you'll have liability. So every board member can recite this back to me at this point, right? What do I tell you? I can't prevent the lawsuit, but a lot of the time we can prevent liability.
Chairman, one funny thought for James. It wouldn't be drunk, it wouldn't be someone accidentally, it'd be the mad one that you fired.
There's another hypothetical. Exactly.
Let me throw some at you.
Mr. Saleh.
I learned this from my Uncle John, he's irrigating a big garden field. And he was about 10 o'clock at night or something. He saw his irrigator, he sits there. Now he hadn't irrigated in probably 10 years. So he sent his man home. Next morning, all that water is in the drain in about 30-foot hole. He forgot, well, if you're not used to irrigating, you fall asleep, you don't think about that,
It's
right?
off the radar.
So, in other words, if you don't know how to irrigate, if you're not irrigating regularly, you better not do it.
Thank you, Mr. Saleh. And for the new board members, I will mention that we have discussed at length depth requirements for utilities that are paralleling our facilities. And we talked about them needing to be buried below the invert of the adjacent facility, which when it's a drain is exceedingly deep. This is why. When those things wash in, they're going to cut back and wash in potentially to a depth that is the inverse of the adjacent facility. And so ensuring that these utilities are below that helps to mitigate potential damage to those during emergency operations to stop water. So when we're discussing that, it may seem arbitrary, but there's a reason for requiring the depths of the utilities when they're paralleling our facilities. It's in the event of emergency water operations. Any other discussion regarding the permits? Thank you very much. That moves us to our next item on the agenda, which is general administrative. We have the financial report.
Okay. Hello. Good morning, board. I have for you this morning to start with your
Can I pause for one moment? Do we have our screen sharing on? We should.
Well, you have to every time turn it on.
Right, I apologize. I didn't describe that correctly. I'm not saying that it is. I'm saying we should have our screen sharing on for the
Right.
presentation.
She needs to reshare once you take the other stuff. She has to share this.
this one's different.
Green.
There we go. Sorry. Well, we can start with Mr. Baldwin's if you wish.
Yeah, we haven't, we'll hold off on Mr. Baldwin until we get to that item in the agenda.
Okay, so to start with, as on the agenda, the financial report starts with your balance sheet. It shows this is for March of 2023. This is only your operations fund. It does not include the LID information. Things are in reasonable shape for the LID, or not the LID, I'm sorry, the O&M. Here is the LID. It still has about $600,000 in funds that are available to spend on LID projects. Are there any questions on the balance sheet?
I had a brief one, Mr. Byram or potentially Mr. Esslinger. The accounts receivable for assessments. Is it typical for those to shore up once water starts flowing?
Yes, say yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Oops. I'm sorry about that, Naomi.
It's a green button.
Okay.
And then your Excel, your
This one.
and then hit share.
Oh, dear. Oh no. Oh no. Oh no. I haven't done it. No. Thank you. I'll try not to hit the wrong X next time. For the current month, again, this is March. This is the LID. We're still doing well on our interest earnings on the investments, but there have still been no expenditures, and we are still collecting money on our LID assessments for the assessments on November of 22 and prior years. So which X is it?
Just minimize that and go open up your new one.
Okay. Okay, and here is the profit and loss statement for Barch. I have highlighted a few items of interest. The year-to-date budget is not the entire year's budget. It is only for the time period through March. You'll notice in the revenues, we have miscellaneous income that's much above budget, and that's because we received the cash reimbursement for the Kinder Morgan reimbursement, and I'm going to recommend that we do at a later meeting a budget adjustment to recognize this revenue in the budget, and then we can use that money to use for budgeting some expenditures where we are over budget. Engineering expenses are again a little high, but I think most of that continues to be that they bought their some of their items that they needed at the beginning of the year, and they're still catching up with their budget. Some of the places where we're still above budget is audit, legal, and consulting. And this time we actually are above budget for our mobile phones. I think part of that is because we started operating some of them for the irrigation system. Part of it might be that I need to go in and look and see if there's any that we can deactivate because we're not using them. Postage, we tend to make our postage expenditures all at once. And we also had that big mailing for the information on the start of the irrigation season, and that kicked us up. Let's see, this one is for our insurance. This is mostly for some of the items that have come up related to some damages that we've experienced. And then utilities are still high. Some of that is left over from January, from when we had the high gas expenses, and some of them are just that some of the utilities are high. If we get time, we can try to look at it. We are doing very well on our investments that we have with the state treasurer's office, and we're doing better now with the interest on our receivables. Both of those are on a cash basis in this report, so that reflects money that we've actually received. The rest of the items are pretty much doing as expected. And I stand for questions on the profit and loss.
Questions for Mrs. Byram? Mrs. Esslinger.
Question. Karen, going back, you said something about Kinder Morgan.
Mhm.
Where is that showing up, and can you give us a little bit more information on that?
Yes, it is showing up currently in miscellaneous income category because it was reimbursements for prior year expenditures. And it was $140,600, I think, which we could, again, it wasn't included in the original budget year-to-date or yearly budget. So we could put it in here and include that as money that is available for expenditure.
Mrs. Alpay.
Is that for 2022?
No, I believe this is the 2021.
Well, we received a reimbursement for 2021 in the neighborhood of 160.
That's my recollection as well.
It was like 163,000. But what I would need is the 2022 stuff, so we can send a demand letter and get that coming this year. That will, I expect, will be around another 130,000. That number looks like what I would expect to see from last year, but I know we got more out of them this year. For the
140,000 that I mentioned is just for the consultant reimbursement of the
that's consulting,
consulting.
you're correct. Okay, so I missed that. She broke down consulting versus internal staff time. So we're billing them for both. And they paid and recovered, we recovered on everything through 2021 so far for both internal staff time and external consulting. So I missed that. She's probably correct on the consulting side of things, but the total reimbursement was in the neighborhood of 160 plus.
That is also my recollection. It's around 160,000. Mrs. Esslinger, did that answer your
Yes.
question? And just provide some additional clarification, especially to new board members. Stemming from the gasoline spill into our drain, EBID has been monitoring the activities there. There are expenses associated with that. Those expenses are being reimbursed by Kinder Morgan. So we accumulate those expenses, we document them, we present them to Kinder Morgan, and we're reimbursed for them.
We will start seeing less of those expenses because we have changed how we're monitoring that site at this point. So we will see less going out the door. But that also means less being reimbursed. They reimburse for everything also, including, for example, my time in preparing the demand letter to send to them to get reimbursement. My time on the phone with their insurance adjuster to go over the costs and get reimbursement. So they're reimbursing for everything. We just have to detail it the right way to get the money.
So we've got a reasonably cooperative agreement with them. So but we hope that will continue. Other questions for Ms. Byron? I have one comment. At our last board meeting, we assigned the initial review of our financial position to the settlement committee. I would ask Mrs. Byram and Mr. Esslinger to please schedule a meeting with that committee and Mrs. Byram, so we can start the process of reviewing her recommendations, both immediately for budget adjustments, as well as preparing for the needs for the district for the year coming. Mrs. Sullivan.
I actually have multiple requests for meetings.
Would it help to coordinate those
It would,
outside of open
because
session?
some of them, for example, we need to have a board workshop on the index. We need to have a board workshop on how we intend to comply with the index, and what currently we're asking for to do that. And so that will include financial components, but also training on just general matters will all feed into this budget discussion. It does every year. It's not a surprise. That should not be news to anybody unless you're a new board member. But so the settlement implementation piece is important because of what we're doing this year with the money that we have. That's why we suggested starting it there. But as we've discussed, it may branch off into its own separate budget discussion while we continue settlement implementation. So it would help to coordinate all of those. I was going to suggest that we do that as a board group, sort of over lunch today, not necessarily as part of this meeting. They're not necessarily agenda items we have to flag for the public. It's internal work.
Correct. Thank you, Ms. Saul. So to clarify that besides just this committee meeting, there are full board workshops that we need to do in order to discuss the details of both the operating agreement, the settlement decree, potential for influxes of funding for infrastructure, and how all those things wrap together. Those will be noticed public meetings that they are for the full board.
I would say they are noticed but not open to the public. If they are related to settlement discussions, we cannot by court order include the public.
Correct. So the workshops will be noticed public meetings.
Right.
Either open or closed as is appropriate by court order. The committee meetings will be separate and fall out of that. It is my intention not to meeting you to death. But there's business that is not urgent, but needs timely resolution specifically with regards to potential budget adjustments. So the settlement committee, please be prepared for committee meetings, board, please be prepared for workshops prior to the June meeting, the June regular board meeting. Thank you, Ms. Salt. Any other further comments on that? Any other comments from the board regarding the financial update? Hearing none, we'll move to our next item of business, which is contract renewal for professional services for the Selena IU.
Yes, this is just a contract renewal. This is year 3 of a 4-year procured professional services contract for legal services. And I am unaware of any price changes or changes in the contract itself.
That's correct. No changes.
So,
I'm sorry, I did not see the attachment in here, but there are no rate changes.
thank you. So it's confirmed that the rate scale remains constant from the previous contract that was approved. Questions regarding the contract? Contracts and scope of work are in your board book. Here are no questions. What is the will of the board with the renewal of the contract? I have a motion from Mr. Solbeck and a second from Mr. Lyles to approve the renewal of professional services contract to Selena IU. Any discussion? Hearing none, discussion is closed. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The president, the ayes have it, and the motion carries. That brings us to our next item, which is the audit presentation for fiscal year 2022. Ms. Byram, I'll let you hand it off to Mr. Baldwin as appropriate.
Okay, yes, here is Mr. Baldwin. He is from our auditors, Baldwin Accounting Group. And he is here to present our 22 audit that was recently released.
Yes, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the board. My apologies for not being out there. I had a scheduling conflict, so I'm in Albuquerque today. I just shared the report, and if we need to go over anything once we start discussing it, I can go to any part of the report as you all would like to. As was mentioned, this was for October 31st, 2022. So this was my first year as your auditor. It's always more work involved in the first year audit where, you know, this is the first year, so we're documenting your processes. We're looking at various areas of your internal control, so disbursements, payroll, revenues, just to make sure there's adequate review and approval processes in place. And always a lot more work and a lot more transactions that we look at that first year. Just to point out, this was a clean opinion, so the district received an unmodified opinion, which is a clean opinion. That's the highest opinion you can get. And I have.
I can't understand the audio, and I think that is going to be a concern.
So, Mr. Baldwin.
Yes.
We're having troubles hearing your audio.
Okay.
Mr. President, how come we don't have him in person here? I mean, for an audit, we got, I don't know why, but you just asked me.
And like I had mentioned, I apologize. I had a scheduling conflict today and I wasn't able to make it down to Las Cruces. So my goal to have the presentation in person. So I think going forward, we can do that. Just unfortunately, I wasn't able to come down today. Are you all able to hear me well?
Hear you better now.
Okay.
I can hear you fine online. I think that, is there a problem in the room there?
It sounds almost like he got into a mumble and it just tapered off. I could not understand what he was saying. So I'll ask that you be clear, because this is something that we make the minutes from, and the audience needs to be able to hear what's going on.
Okay, I'll speak a little louder just to make sure you all can hear me. So I discussed the opinion and what we look at if there are any findings. So there was a finding last year, which was a late audit report. That finding has been resolved for 2022 because it was submitted on time, which is March 31st is the audit report due date to the state auditor's office. So this year's audit was submitted on time. So that finding was dropped off. There is one other finding for this year. I have it on the screen if you all can see. If not, I can expand it to make sure everybody can see it. There is a finding for what we call adjustment for the correction of an error. So there was a Mesquite water treatment plant project that was canceled in 2020, but it was still recorded on the books in your asset listing. Since it was canceled in 2020, it should have been written off then. That amount was $257,074. When it's a large adjustment, it's considered an audit finding since it had to be recorded through the audit process. So that's, I had discussed that with Karen, and I have the adjustment for her to enter on the district side, and that amount or balance should be removed from the asset listing. And once that's removed, that finding will be resolved for the FY23 audit. Are there any questions on that?
I do have a question about how it was determined that that project was canceled. We didn't cancel that project. At least not, maybe from a financial perspective, but that project was never canceled by either the board of directors or the manager. So how is it determined that it was canceled?
My discussion with Karen was that it was canceled.
We had paperwork that showed that we canceled it with the financing authority.
We didn't cancel it though in terms of completion probability later was a problem. The finance authority and I got into it over exactly how we were going to go about closing out that project. But I'm thinking of the right one.
No, it got
The Mesquite
canceled.
water treatment plant.
It got canceled because of the drought, and we could not proceed with the design plan for surface water treatment plant, and it was the Lower Rio Grande Water Public Works Authority
For Mesquite.
who requested that it be canceled because they could not meet the schedule that had been placed. So it was canceled with the finance authority due to the fact that we couldn't provide the water during a drought for the surface water treatment plant. So the inventory was then held within the district.
Right.
And the inventory has been, in some cases, been used on other projects, and some was just recently, I understand, let go to
Yes, we sold the water tank at
a water
auction.
tank. So the question is, did Mr. Baldwin, did you check with Mr. Watts about that process of cancellation and what occurred as far as what was in inventory and what was left in inventory from that cancellation?
Part of that process, I looked at your listing, I saw the expenses. And so whenever there is a project that's canceled, at least the year that it is canceled, those costs would be expensed on the books. So that's what the write-off is for. So when we say prior adjustment, in 2020, when the project was canceled, it should have been written off, and any costs that were incurred in that year should have been expensed rather than recorded as an asset to be capitalized. So I saw the detail of expenses that were still there for the canceled project. So the write-off in essence shows that those costs were expensed instead.
Mr. President, I would just like to note then that it appears to me that the auditor didn't understand what we went through in the process of quote unquote canceling the project. We did not cancel, the other party did. There were legal repercussions for us that we negotiated out of in order to keep that property. The project was not canceled as it applied to us. I want to be very clear on the record about that because this was actually a big legal issue we navigated to avoid having the liability, some of which is now hitting you.
Thank you, Mrs. Alpeg. Questions from the board regarding the audit finding? Mr. Baldwin, please proceed.
Is it likely that the project will be continued? I mean, that was my understanding from the report, looking at the documentation and my discussions with Karen, that that project was canceled or it was not to be continued or would not be continued.
I think the answer to that is the way we negotiated with the state did not allow for that particular project to continue, but allowed us to remain in possession and control of the materials for purposes of other related and similar projects without having to be liable for 100% of the project cost because it was canceled. So it was actually a very tenuous situation for us that we not end up on the hook for the full liability of that project because it got canceled midway through. So we were able to get out of it on the basis of the state agreeing to let us do other things with that property and those assets that were not originally consistent with this project. So to say now that that was canceled, to me, throws a monkey wrench in our settlement agreement because it's the opposite of what we did with the state. This looks to me like a lack of continuity in information institutionally that maybe should have flowed to Karen. Unfortunately, it is what it is. This has already been reported as an audit finding. My position on the record would be that that is incorrect.
Thank you, Mrs. Alpec. Please continue, Mr. Baldwin.
Okay. And that's the only finding to be reported. Just to report, I had a good experience working with staff when I was out there doing the audit work. Documentation was provided promptly, and I had no issues or disagreements with either management or personnel. So, I mean, it was a really good first year audit in terms of what was documented and the documentation that was provided. So I have no areas of concern other than what we had discussed as the audit finding.
Mr. Baldwin, if you could speak a little more loudly, please.
Okay. Just as I had mentioned, I had no issues or disagreements with management. Everybody I worked with in terms of providing information, I received a lot of good information, adequate supporting documentation for any disbursements, payroll activity, any deposits or payments that were received. So I had no complaints to provide that I would say for management or personnel there. Were there any questions, any areas you would like to look at in terms of the audit report?
Any questions for Mr. Baldwin from the board?
How come you didn't give us, the board members, something we can look at instead of TV? I mean, I don't understand it, so whatever you got.
So the question was, we do not have a written copy of the audit report.
Yes, and unfortunately, I was heading out there and I had a conflict up here, so I have the printed copies. Unfortunately, they're with me and they'll be promptly mailed out to your office today. But unfortunately, due to my schedule change, I was not able to leave Albuquerque with them. So I have the screen, or I have the view online. Unfortunately, that's all I have to show you right now.
Mrs. Saltek, you had a comment.
I don't think I heard the answer to Gary's question about whether he worked with our prior auditors to understand the issue with the project and how it was previously recorded in our audits. I don't think I got that question, that answer clearly.
It was previously, that was part when I had looked through where it was recorded. I showed it in your asset listing, but in your financial statements, it's recorded as a prepaid asset. So I felt that it was incorrectly recorded in that category. And when I had followed up with Mr. Watts, he forwarded me the same asset schedule that Karen had provided, so I didn't get about the construction process activity. So I didn't, I requested information, but as the prior auditor, they sometimes provide a lot of information and then sometimes they do not. But at least what I had seen for the construction and process, I saw that as an old project, and my inquiries and what I had saw showed that it was no longer a project to be completed. So when that happens, then it should have been expensed rather than capitalized.
So we're having trouble understanding, Mr. Baldwin. Just to be very clear, did you speak with the prior auditor regarding this audit finding?
This audit finding, no, because it was not an audit finding last year, and it was grouped in an account that was not construction and process. So it was not even grouped in a fixed asset schedule. It was grouped together as a prepaid asset, which is incorrect. And that
So,
was
Mr. President,
last
I
year.
think I have the record I need clear enough at this point in time. The answer is that no, there was no conversation with the prior auditor. And so again, for the record, for purposes of me today, my situation, we had separate, there was no previous finding. Our separate auditor had seen this project multiple times and had advised us, along with legal counsel, along with others who are up to speed, along with the state, on how to get through this process appropriately. And so I still take issue based on the full record and the lack of conversation and the way he looked at it, but not with potentially all of the information he could have had available to him. I take a big issue with this particular audit finding, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mrs. Salve. Other comments from the board? Mr. Black.
Since we're auditing everything, I sure would appreciate you coming down here, getting us our information and talking clearly. You know, I'm sitting there in this deal and I didn't hear half of it, my friend, and I'm sure not wanting to beat you up, but it sure would have helped if you'd have been here looking us in the face. And I know you had other commitments, but one of them was here, and we sure didn't get very full audit detail on this thing. Thank you very much.
Mr. Solopek.
Well, I've been here a while, but if we have to sign a name on this, I'd rather have him be more explaining. I mean, most audits I've seen are, how are you gonna do it? Are you gonna sign this and without everybody agreeing? I don't know. I don't agree with it. I didn't know what he was saying anyhow.
So I don't know that it was mentioned, the exit interview was conducted. I was briefed on the complete audit as well as the findings. And I acknowledged that I received the exit brief. Other comments from the board? Ms. Byron, any follow-up?
We are going to work to make sure that we are accounting for all of our assets correctly.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Baldwin. And I concur, getting our audit presentation in person with the written material prior to our board meeting is important to this board.
Okay, I will ensure that I do not have any schedule conflicts in the future.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Baldwin. Thank you, Mr. Byron. Bring us to our next item of business. The Teague encroachment agreement.
Mr. President, I have visited with engineering on this, and certainly we have some documentation to show we need it. But let me go through this. This encroachment agreement was issued as a special use permit in 1997 to Harry Wiley on a property that he had off of the Shalem Drain north of Las Cruces. And Mr. Wiley had come to the board and asked for a special use permit for a garage that's set on portion of it set on our right of way. And the board minutes reflect that the special use permit for the encroachment was approved by the board in 1997. The December board meeting reflects that. Since Mr. Wiley had passed away, the property was sold to a Mr. Penn, and subsequently he sold it to Mr. Jared and Mary T, who live in the house at this time, and also improved on the structure that was encroaching on our right of way. They have come in requesting now a new encroachment agreement. And based on our 1999 engineering encroachment agreement, right of way encroachment and all ill-defined right of way, this was approved August 11th, 1999. It says the trespasser will be notified of the option of entering into an encroachment agreement, a permit, and or a license with the district. Encroachment determined the affected property to be excess property in the event the property can be considered for disposal or not. So Mr. T is asking that a new agreement with the district be approved. And that would be the one that we have developed through an encroachment agreement called 2023 L-036. And it would be between the Teagues and EBID. And that would be the agreement that we would ask for today for the board to approve. We've looked at it. I looked at it personally. There is a photo perhaps in the agreement. If it's not, I can circulate it. So you can see the garage that certainly has been, there it is. It's certainly been improved, but you can tell that it's in our right of way about 13 feet, but it would not inhibit or stop any kind of drain cleaning or anything that we would need to do in that area where he's got a truck trailer backed up to. So again, that being the case, I don't see a problem with following the engineering policy, the board policy that we have in place.
Mr. Sullivan.
Who owns the orchard across the street? I mean,
I believe it belongs to Les Fletcher.
Who?
Les.
Yeah, well, I mean, you got enough room there to clean it if you have to. It's not even been run for a while, has it?
No, that's it, pretty much. The only consideration is that in an encroachment agreement, if we find the need to improve that drain for flood control or storage, we would request that perhaps that portion of drain from Salem Colony past the garage be piped. And that would be an expense put on the owner of the encroachment.
Well, even the second owner didn't even. The second owner didn't ever do anything.
No.
Still in the.
No, it sat there vacant until the Teagues purchased it and improved it.
Mr. Lyle.
To the best of my recollection, this building's been there as long as I can remember. It was a block building. There was an original house that got tore down. They rebuilt the house, and they, on this building, they, looks like they stuccoed it. That building's been there forever.
Right. It's considered a garage at one time. That's what the permit that he came before the board is, maintain an existing garage. It's shop garage. Yeah, shop garage.
Mrs. Sullivan.
Mr. President, I, under the direction of the board, I was restricted in whether and to what extent we could bring these to the board. Gary and I discussed this and determined that that restriction that the board previously placed on us, we can't function under that while also meeting the needs of people who come to us still under existing board policies. You'll recall that the board instructed me to begin the policy overhaul early last year. That was put on hold for reasons we won't discuss. They were starting the process again, but in the meantime, the board had issued certain instructions to me consistent with what certain board members were not liking, which was use of our property in ways that looked to be purposeful and nefarious just for the purpose of coming and taking property from EBID. So again, new construction, barn encroaches, and all of a sudden they go, oh, oops, well, sell me your property then for $4,000 an acre. So the board was trying to clamp down on those things. The problem is we have written board policies in place and people still come and apply to us for these. We have no mechanism to stop that. We also don't have the choice to not bring it to you when that happens. So we, knowing that we are getting back into the policy overhaul, but also knowing that we have a very new board that hasn't necessarily made some of these determinations, and the previous board had not made consistent all the time determinations on those things. The instructions were pretty loose. Just don't bring these to us for a while until we can get our policies updated. We did hold off on some of these for a while, but we're not able to do that anymore.
Thank you, Mrs. Albeck. Questions from the board?
I have a question.
Mrs. Etling.
How many of these come on our way? I'd say annually or every 5 years, or are we dealing with a lot of these?
We can potentially, depends, because if, for example, we start going towards, like in 2019, the direction we were going towards, which was, no, we don't want encroachment agreements, just sell them the property. You will see a rush on us for property sales. That's why the board issued the moratorium saying no more of that. But these aren't property sales. These are how the Bureau and EBID has handled this for over 100 years. The distinction was that the board didn't want these forcing us to sell property. This actually avoids that. It says this is our property, and if at any time we say you need to get off, you've got to get off. You're here by contract. If you notice the last line of this contract that our engineer drew up years ago, it's actually a decent contract Henry wrote. It says that there is no easement created. There is no legal right created other than a contractual right here. So it does give us the ability to say, your use is now interfering with ours and ours comes first, just like our permit conditions, where the sales of property that were coming instead of these, you have no control anymore. You were just getting rid of property. As a board, the board said, hold on, we're not going to do that anymore. This is why we're bringing these back to you.
Mr. Esslinger.
Yes. One other thing to consider, and this is just random, is that these permits are not transferable. So if there's a land ownership change, that permit goes away. And it was the Teagues that found out that through the record that there was a special use permit issued to Harry Wiley. So they want it renewed under their name, and that's how it came about. And so when you have land sales, those, if there's a permit attached to that land from a previous owner, it goes away. They have, the new owner has to come in and acquire a new permit. And that happens sometimes at random and sometimes 4 or 5 in a year. Just depends.
So to be clear, make sure I understand this correctly as well, licenses are not transferable. The encroachment agreement is in perpetuity on the property. It is binding upon the owner, their heirs, assigns, and successors.
So what Gary was referring to, Mr. President, is that a lot of these were previously under license agreements with the Bureau of Reclamation. When that license or permit expires for certain types of events, we transition them to this that does run with the land. For some, we don't. This would be a longer term structure. So
Does that help clarify your question, Mrs. Esslinger? I'm not sensing that it did, so let's keep trying.
It answered my question.
Thank you. Any other questions from the board?
I like this. A lot of this stuff the realtors don't care, they don't say nothing, you know, they just sell the land, get their commission and gone. That's like water rights and everything else, they just wanna sell it and get out of here. I mean, they don't wanna put no work into it, you know, that's like why they sold it, or what's the name, and then these guys, they didn't probably, when they bought it, they didn't know about it till we got it, you know, so.
Mrs. Solvay.
Exactly to that point, to the Teague's credit here, they have come to us and requested to follow the proper process. In 99% of the cases, we have people running from us, refusing to go through our process. So to their credit, they are saying, oh, we just realized we need a permit or something in writing with you. What do we do? And they have come to us requesting that. Previously, when the board said, no more of these, we're not doing this anymore. And that got to the point of, we're gonna hold off on all of these types of transactions, even if they wouldn't be sales. That got to the point where it enabled people to run and do whatever they wanted. And new barns got built on our property in the meantime. And if you don't believe me, we can take you and show them to you. So we effectively went too far one direction in saying, stop what we're doing. And the board never then put it down for us as far as what the expectation was when we got over in this realm. And so now we're back to center where we have our policies, we know what they mean, and trying to curb people from doing whatever they want on their property or on our property. These types of agreements spell out the relative rights of everybody, and we want people going through this process.
I agree with Mrs. Saltbeck's assessment on that. Which brings us to the question I have, which is Article 11, which is fees. And use of subject fees assessed by the board of directors. What is the recommendation for how we handle fees for encroachment agreements versus the process we have in handling fees via licenses and our fee structure?
Mr. President, staff will not make such a recommendation today.
Okay, thank you. That said, we are not limited by this contract, by this agreement, as I understand it, in needing to determine the fees today. Those fees can be determined whether we approve this agreement or not, or whether we ask them to go down the path of a license. It is my opinion that these encroachment agreements are a better solution for these historic encroachments onto our rights of way. To answer Mrs. Essling's question about how many of these there are, I believe that was your question. My expectation is many. When we see these, when we look at a particular area that we're working, and suddenly we realize a 100-year-old house encroached on this at the start of the project and was just never documented, never caught, but now we see it. How do we handle that? That's not somebody's current malicious actions. There are any number of reasons why it could have occurred. How do we mitigate those impacts to the district and to the encroaching individuals? Mrs. Essling.
So I think the word historic is an important word here. So you're saying that we're dealing with historic encroachments, or are we dealing with current encroachments as well?
Mrs. Solopek.
Please do not use the word historic in this boardroom. The idea that a property is a historic property then invokes other laws that could cause problems with, for example, our maintenance obligations. And we run into historic preservation issues regularly. These are not in every sense of the word historic in terms of what would qualify under those statutes.
Okay.
I just would not want those lines blurred at all. In a sense, what you're talking about are some that have been there forever and some that, like in this situation, have been there forever but have been revitalized. Or, for example, properties that have been there forever, knocked down, rebuild, and all of a sudden part of it is now on our property where previously it was just right up against our property. Lots of things happen with surveyors and different engineering problems out on the ground. For example, the county often has their own rules as far as setbacks and requirements that cause a farmer to push into our property instead of pushing onto something else. So it just depends as far as why we handle these particular ones the way we do. Encroachments are handled in this way because they typically are the older, less malicious, so to speak, actions on our property. It's the newer ones, the ones that are coming in, either not telling us, then we're catching them after the fact, or they're asking for something new that the board is shuttling completely through the license process instead of these.
Does that help, Mr. Benson?
Yes.
And I
Again, the
apologize
distinction
for-
within the staff level is also clear as mud sometimes too, which is why we just sometimes bring these to you and say, well, let's see what they do this time, you know, because there are standards. But what the previous board was giving us as far as those standards, there was a very stark difference of opinion on this board previously that didn't lead to any actual board policy. So what I am telling you is we are applying board policy until further notice. The board policy is what's written. And if this new board tells us this is what's written, but also do this in a very clear way, then absolutely. But previously the board's direction was coming in a disheveled way, not consistently clear and not consistently in agreement with across the board. So in trying to apply that, we have now determined starting point A is always our written board policies, especially given that we know we're going back towards policy overhaul anyway at this point.
Thank you. Other questions, general questions? At this point, I would ask for a motion for either an encroachment agreement or a license to mitigate this encroachment. What is the will of the board?
What's the recommendation of staff? An agreement or a license?
For these longer term ones, my recommendation would be that you use a longer term encroachment agreement until we get to the point where we fully developed a long-term lease arrangement. I'm following the model of the International Boundary and Water Commission. And so essentially we're working with them to update their land use policies. In the process, we are stealing some of their ideas. So we're not reinventing the wheel completely. And what they've done is basically exactly what we already had set up, which is long-term agreement for the very permanent structures, a short-term agreement for the not so permanent structures. Now, in that though, they don't have in their not so permanent structures crossings of their facilities. Those would be long-term, but for us, those are short-term. A culvert over a small lateral is not a long-term deal. I mean, a farmer can handle that in an afternoon, right? So that's not necessarily going to go into your long-term encroachment, but an actual constructed structure like this would always likely go the encroachment or long-term lease route. Selena has actually drafted the leasing policy. We haven't presented it to the board yet because we got a lot of pushback from certain board members that just wasn't how they wanted to see things. Selena and I stopped our process altogether. But that will come back before you guys because that was part of the instruction to us in the beginning as far as policy overhaul. Long-term handled separate from short-term.
And so to clarify that as well, what's our alternative other than selling our property? If somebody desires use of it, it's in the interest of the district to grant that use, how do we do it without selling it? And long-term leases is one of the solutions we asked to be considered.
No, just say something happened to that, and they have a long-term agreement, rebuild it. We can move it in at that point, or still have that option there. Just out of, this is just a curiosity question.
I'll take a stab at that. So
Yeah.
if I understand the agreement correctly, if they wish to modify, improve, change, expand that structure, it requires the permission of the district. At that point in time, I expect the district would ask them to move it off of our property.
Right.
If they're reconstructing it anyways. That's my expectation. But they have to come to us for improvements, expansions, and modifications.
So this was exactly the issue, right? With the situation where one gentleman had a barn that he wanted to put on our property and another one had something different and the board approved one but not the other. That was exactly the issue, was when they come to us and they want something on our property, it's already there. Or it's not there, but it makes sense for their farming operation. A lot of time in the past, the board would work with them to let their barn encroach as long as we had what we needed through these longer term agreements. But that's where the board said no more and didn't give one person his barn, but then the other that looked very similar, the board did give that person what they were asking for. And there was a lot of discussion in the room that day as to why we are treating them different and why they fit different molds. And at this point in time, staff are not going to be in a position to make those calls. I'm not gonna let them, you guys have to make those calls. Because for applying board policy from our perspective, it's what's written down, that's what we go with. The board had sort of started us on this path of, this is where we're going and this is what we're going to write down. So we started treating new things that came in the door consistent with that. But the board never went there. And then parts of that program were even yanked under the prior administration. So it's very much Swiss cheese right now. So we're going back to the standard policies. And so under the standard policies, this would be long-term. We would typically handle this as an encroachment agreement. A recommendation would be that you handle it according to how we handled encroachment agreements previously.
What is the role of the board?
I move that we approve the encroachment agreement. Am I right, Craig?
035. I have a motion for Mr. Lack to approve the encroachment agreement 2023-L-035.
Second.
I have a second from Mr. Nunez. Discussion. Hearing no discussion is closed. All those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Being the president, the ayes have it, the motion carries. Next order of business.
My first day last week was May 1st, and I spent the rest of that day in Hatch. On the second day, tours were scheduled for Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And we split it up, inviting new board members and also board members who had wanted a refresher course. And so on the first day, we went to Caballo and watched the water hit the Perch Dam and showed them the Caballo river gauge, which is a critical and important gauge for the compact, and actually saw them metering over the cableway on one of those tours. We then went through the Hatch Valley and highlighted certain things that were bottlenecks, as well as certain projects that have been completed and were working well, such as the river pumps at Wasteway 18. And some of the other features of that Water Smart grant that we had completed, and the system was well functioning at that time. We went through Broad Canyon, Selden Canyon, and stopped at the Broad Canyon Dam, where we showed them that this dam contributes a lot to the irrigation season when we capture flood water behind it. It's a huge watershed, reaches way back to the road from Deming to Silver City. That amount of water in the past has irrigated and helped us irrigate for months after a big flood event or storm event happens in that Selden Canyon reach. We went then to a couple of sites that we have investigated and planned for utilizing the IRA money and the bill money for improvements. And that one of them was at Leesburg Dam, where we have developed an idea of sediment control there, which is a big problem for the Leesburg system, because the sluice waves and the headings draw a lot of sand into the Leesburg Canal. And so we wanted the new board member to see the problems we have at these diversion dams due to the sediment in the river, and how we try to function using hydraulics to pull the sand out of the river and back into the river below those structures. So we showed them that. we showed them some sites here in the central area that were under construction, like the California extension, which would also allow river pumps to go in at that extension to deliver water to large pecan orchards in that area. And those farmers cooperated with those projects by writing checks out for pipe that they wanted to put into our canal system that would make the system more efficient for delivery to their farms. And so it will make those farmers upstream better able to get water faster because we're not having to push water all the way down to the south to water those large farms. So we're showed them some of those projects that were in place, working, and yet not complete. We then went to the south districts and showed them, again, features of where we might be able to capture stormwater and utilize it again for irrigation purposes and also for recharging the aquifer. And again, that was shown to be enlightening because the tail end of the Hatch Valley, where it goes, narrows into a Selden Canyon, backs up drain water. And people like Dwayne and Joe Paul, who could see the same problem that was experienced down in the South Valley, where you have water, it's difficult for your drain returns to go over the pass of the north. That water backs up some of it all the way to Canutillo. And you can see when you're been in a drought for 23 years and you can still see water in the drains, you're going, why the heck here? And it's because of this problem with these natural rifts in the ground that you can't see with your eye, but they're there and they're just acting as a weir and they're pushing that water back. So in those places, the wildlife is extremely present, and it was some of the board members saw all kinds of wildlife, coyotes and everything else, quail. Others saw a herd of javelina cross in front of us. So it was quite an interesting tour for that. And I think based on my comments from the board, it was successful, but I'm here to listen from the board members that went on the tour as well.
Thank you, Mr. Esslinger. Comments from the board on the tours?
Just a second, I did when Sam was on the board, and that was just a 1-day tour. The 2 days is not as compacted and a lot easier to get around and see everything. I find it, the information is, there's a lot of information to cover and everybody needs to understand what the district is, what it does. And I said it before, and I'll say it again, I think it's something that ought to be opened up to growers. To set it up and let them see the differences in the district and the sections of it and how some things are similar and other things are a little bit different. So all in all, it's a good tour.
I really enjoyed the tour. I thought it was great. And it really did explain a lot. I think that's a good idea what you just brought up. Maybe get some other people that can understand a little bit. I understand a little bit. Looking at it.
Comments that have been previously said, just being a grower, not really understanding the system after going on this tour, I think it was really enlightening. And also to open it up to growers, I think they would understand a lot of the issues that we face. I know that it opened my eyes a lot, helped me understand, put a face to everything that we've been talking about here in the boardroom.
I just saw so many wonderful opportunities for this district to, especially in the area of capturing floodwater, stormwater, opportunities for recharge. It was very, very exciting and eye-opening, and I think it's something that we can set out as a goal as contributing positively to capturing water. And so I look forward to looking at some of these projects and some of the funding coming through that we can make these a reality.
Thank you, Ms. Essener, and I concur with the comments of my colleagues. I found the tour to be very positive. The 2-day format was much easier to digest than the 1-day format. I like the idea of expanding it out to other growers, tying with the idea of opportunities, not just to show them the things we're facing. They're going to see things differently than we do. A different set of eyes will see opportunities that we may have missed. And I think there is a lot to be gained from finding out how do we offer this to growers? How do we make that happen? So that's an excellent idea. Mrs. Solveig.
Leveraging the vision of the farmers against the vision of EBID is important. And that's again why we have asked farmers to come to us early this year with their ideas for projects and for maintenance so that we can include that if possible in what we're working on with IRA and bill money. Again, the ideas of the district are often a particular subset of ideas based on our struggles internally. But once you see those, you go, oh, now I see how I'm interfacing with you. And a farmer is always going to have an excellent solution. We just may not be able to apply it right there, but it may work somewhere else on a larger scale. A lot of these projects you see, like the one you're looking at on the screen, they start out very small. They start out with just a vision of, I'm having trouble getting someone their water right here. Why am I having that trouble? And when you start the conversation, all of a sudden, you end up with multi-million-dollar projects paid for by the federal government to fix our problems. So we have an opportunity, but again, this is exactly why we're asking farmers to come in and have these conversations with us sooner rather than later. We also, I wanted to flag, got to show group 2, how water measurement is taken on the cableway up at Caballo, which was very cool. Ideally, we will get more technology out in the field when we get some of the farmers going. We were able to show one recent tour, our gravity meter in action. So those are all very, very pertinent to what we do daily, because as those of you on the tour learned, we have to know where the water is at every given moment in time, everywhere in our system, to do the best possible management of that water. And so all the tools we use, like watching Albert on the cableway, are important. Those are important to understanding why when you see a problem at your farm's head gate, you have to understand what all is going on behind the scenes to know it's not just the problem here, but there's other things playing in. How do I work better to interface with EBID as a whole? But again, that's exactly why we're asking farmers to come in early, come in often with these ideas, because we're at a point where we have ideas on where we might fix problems, but farmers will also have those same sorts of ideas.
Thank you, Mrs. Solveig. Any other comments on the tours? Thank you, Mr. Esslinger.
I think that covers item C as well. I had a busy week last week. And certainly trying to get around and meet with staff and employees in between trying to take tours. It was fun last week. The other thing that is on here that I'm just giving you a heads up. This is something new. Have not really seen any other information on it, but it's called the inaugural meeting of the Rio Grande water users. It's on October 3rd and 5th. As I find out more information about it, I'll definitely bring it back to you. But it says here, just to give you a broad umbrella of what they're trying to do here, is they're saying, we encourage you to join us for the first ever Rio Grande River water users meeting, during which we will exchange ideas and perspectives on the Rio Grande River's use, management, and related challenges as we seek to develop common objectives and solutions. I'm not sure if that's from Colorado to El Paso or Colorado to Brownsville, Texas.
I apologize, Mr. President. That is one of my agenda items I did not catch, ended up under Gary's. I actually have the update on that.
Very good. I did know. But anyway, it's coming up and we'll look at that in advance.
Thank you, Mr. Esslinger. So then we'll go ahead and start with item D for the manager's update with you, Ms. Salt, and then continue on to the legal update.
So Gary has not been in our board meetings regularly over the last few months, so he did not hear that we are working on setting up an association of Rio Grande River water users, similar to the way CRUA on the Colorado River handles their annual business meeting in Las Vegas. We are trying to set up something similar to bring awareness to Rio Grande issues within our reach of the river. The ideas floating around though are abundant, and there are competing efforts now apparently to start something of this nature. The International Boundary and Water Commission had their own that they were getting started, and it was going to be from south of Fort Quitman to the headwaters. And then the USGS had their own that was going to be from Colorado to Fort Quitman. And the group that is before you in your board book is one that irrigation and other water users within New Mexico were working on starting. And that was intended to be from Colorado to the mouth down in Texas. So the whole river. We do not know necessarily where the other two groups are going, but I can tell you as far as our group goes, we already have a contract with the hotel. We have an agenda in draft form, and we've been reaching out to heads of state for purposes of keynotes, addresses, different presentations for the group, including Assistant Secretary of the Department of Interior, Tanya Trujillo, Commissioner of the Bureau of Reclamation, Camille Touton, Commissioner of the International Boundary and Water Commission, Commissioner Hiner, the state engineers from each of the 3 states. So we're further along in our process than the others. That does not mean that the others won't continue on along what they were doing. The one that is before you is the one that we've been contributing to and working with as a part of our lobbying efforts on IRA and bill.
So that was a lot of potential scopes. Which scope is the one we're working on?
Whole river, Colorado to South Texas, we're whole river. The idea being that Colorado always eats our lunch when it comes to Colorado River issues, because it's such a big river and it serves 7 basin states and it's huge, right? And bringing awareness to the idea that Colorado, New Mexico, and Texas also have a big river that serves a lot of communities in a lot of different ways. It's not just about the Colorado River. We have been making some pretty decent headway on that on Capitol Hill, as far as redirecting money from IRA, not necessarily bill yet, but IRA money is getting redirected from the Colorado River to the Rio Grande, because we've raised awareness of our issues here too. That is being met with some angst from those on the Colorado River. I, jokingly got attacked, so to speak, at a cocktail party in DC recently. Colorado River interests wondering why we are making such a fuss on the Rio Grande and why on earth we think we're going to get at their IRA money. And again, the board members in the room know it's not quite as simple as that money going to the Colorado River, because we were successful in getting language inserted into the IRA that says, and other similarly situated drought-stricken basins. Well, we are a similarly situated drought-stricken basin, and our partners with the Bureau of Reclamation have basically carried the torch for us on that issue. So again, Jerry, thank everybody at the Bureau of Reclamation for us, because we're able to do a lot more right now because we're getting the attention we need to and the support we need from the Bureau of Reclamation.
Thank you, Ms. Saltek. So I'll mention, please be sure to mark October 3rd and 5th on your calendars. We do not yet know the attendance needs for the district. As we move towards that, we'll know better, but please be sure that you are maintaining awareness of the 3rd through the 5th, which is the first meeting of the Rio Grande water users. The next item is the legislative and policy update. Ms. Saltek.
So again, I'm continuing to follow bill and IRA money, even as Congress argues over the debt ceiling and what that might do to the money available under those 2 packages. It's looking like IRA is most in jeopardy if they have debt ceiling negotiations that cause them to withdraw money from federal agencies. It will come from IRA first. So we're moving quickly to try and lock down as much of our money as possible. before that happens. We're still told that it would take a little while for them to pull that money back, so we have a chance. But again, we're working on already going into our next round of infrastructure package requests. So essentially updating our package from last year to remove the things that we know have been funded or remove the things that we know will get funded in a different way and add to it based on what we've learned in this last year on all of these tours with federal agency heads, on tours, hopefully with some of the farmers and other agencies that we've been working with. So we continue to monitor those issues pretty closely, because in any given day, one of the federal agencies we're working with is up on Capitol Hill defending their budget. Right now, defending their budget means defending the additional $6 billion that was injected into their budget, not just their normal operating. So it's kind of an interesting time within the federal government. And then as a related matter, the only case law thing that I would like to flag for you is that the United States Supreme Court took a case recently that would potentially see it overturning what we call Chevron deference. Chevron is the case that the Supreme Court basically gave to the federal agencies this unfettered discretion to enact rules and carry out provisions of legislation Congress passes in however they interpret it, basically scenario. And so it gives them broad discretion to interpret the law to carry it out. And it typically is used by environmentalists to be a hammer on people like us. That case is now going up to the Supreme Court because there was a challenge to a rule that required commercial fishermen to pay up to 20% of their profits for third parties to monitor the fish species. And so they said, well, wait a second, that's ridiculous. How can you actually require me to give up my profits to do something that you should be doing, federal government? You should be monitoring these fish species, not us. And so they ended up challenging it, and it has gone all the way to the US Supreme Court. It was accepted, which means the Supreme Court right now is an activist conservative court. Everybody is projecting that Chevron deference will go out the window. That is not necessarily a bad thing for us, but we don't have any Chevron cases right now. The update on the Lower Rio Grande Drought Resiliency Team activities and progress is pretty consistent with where we were last month. We continue to meet. We are continuing to nail down and finalize charter documents. We are selecting projects. In fact, out of this group, one such project is currently being studied on EBID's facilities this week. The state has consultants out doing some soil sampling and some infiltration testing in one of our drains to determine whether those drains would be prime candidates for example, retrofitting other of our facilities to pump water into them for purposes of stormwater capture, infiltration, and recharge. I mean, no offense to the state, but of course, at EBID, we already know those are the best places to infiltrate and recharge because we know what the communication looks like in the groundwater system. The state is working on their due diligence to be able to spend money on those projects. So that's the first project that is actually up and running and in the initial planning stages. We have a few others that are coming down the pipe, and I will just reserve talking about them until we have more details on exactly what has been selected and who the project coordinators will be and how that will all play out. But we are at the point where our 40-page infrastructure package that we put out last year is now being used as a menu to select different types of projects. And so some of those projects will then be removed from that menu, and next year we will add new ones as we have already connected people with those types of projects from this year. So that's a good thing. We're moving in the right direction, and we hope to be able to leverage the full $300 million that the federal government has dedicated to this area. NWRA, we went to the Federal Water Issues Conference in DC. It was somewhat like the Beverly Hillbillies go to DC, only you guys trusted the Solopek family to be the ambassadors for EBID. And what we did at this trip was we coordinated our lobbying strategy with the Middle Rio Grande Conservancy District to lobby together for more attention for their portion of the river reach. So number one question we get at growers meetings, what are you doing about MRGCD? Well, the answer is I'm darn sure not filing lawsuits to stop their water use. But we are working with them to try and get them funding to get them projects that would help with their water efficiency, particularly in delivery to the reservoir, so that more water comes to us. So again, you've heard time and time again, I will ask the state, when do you plan on starting importation of water projects? Because I'm not worried about importation from the Salt Basin. I want importation from the Middle Rio Grande. And everybody laughs and says, that's not importation, that's the Rio Grande Compact. But as a very real issue, getting water through the Middle Rio Grande requires a whole lot of work. MRGCD just had a very difficult board meeting earlier this week. They had a tractor parade from Valencia County with all of the big farmers screaming for the entire day about how they do not have representation on the Middle Rio Grande board. As a frank matter, they don't. There's one farmer on that board. And so that one farmer was in the room with us in DC. And what he was saying was, why are you going to fallow me to send water to the reservoir that is never going to make it to the reservoir and to the southern New Mexico or Texas farmers? Why fallow me then? And it's the same thing we've been saying and that we consistently say across the board when a fallowing conversation arises anywhere in the West, in Colorado, or here on the Colorado River, wherever we are in the 17 Western states, all farmers are saying the same thing. Before you fallow me, make sure there's actual water there. And so what we've done with EBID is we took it a step further and we coined the term reclaiming the West. And what we're trying to do is put infrastructure ahead of fallowing. Well, the Middle Rio Grande right now is very susceptible to fallowing. We're taking no position on what should happen with their fallowing program. They actually have one up and running sometimes. It's recently received more funding, but what we have said in conjunction with what we're doing with reclaiming the West, we have said, help MRGCD get us our water. And the state actually did appropriate money this year as part of the legislative session. Greg can tell you, we went up, we helped support their requests. EBID went to the legislature and supported the state engineer and Middle Rio Grande Conservancy District in their funding request. We then went to DC and we supported that as well. We also are putting together a river-long tour of the district. Middle Rio Grande Conservancy District and EBID are sponsoring this tour together to bring out people like Senator Heinrich, who are concerned, where are the ducks going to go if you rehab the low flow conveyance channel? And I told him, Senator Heinrich, I'll show you exactly where your ducks are going to go. Please come down and see our restoration sites, because part of what we're proposing with this infrastructure is that each site would have restoration habitat as a nexus connected to the project, so that we're not only creating more capture of stormwater, more dedicated recharge, slowing down the water and making it usable as surface water deliveries, but also repairing the riparian and other upland habitat in the process. And he was all over it, right? I thought that's great. So we're working on getting heads of state. We're working on getting our delegation out here. Gary had a meeting yesterday to continue working on the tour and nailing down details related to that. And we're hoping that we can continue to upset those on the Colorado River by raising awareness and bringing money to our river instead of watching it all go to Colorado. So that is generally the update on the Federal Water Issues Conference.
Mr. Esslinger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Samantha, did you happen to talk to the Bureau about our federal screening card?
We are in process with that. What we've been told is that the Bureau of Reclamation has no issue with us getting our federal screening back. We're told that it just takes some time to get paperwork done to actually make that happen. My guess is that we haven't heard from them in a while, so we probably need to be tenacious, as they say, in continuing to contact them. One of the things that the higher ups in the federal government are consistently telling us across the board in all of these federal agencies is that we have an unprecedented amount of money in our system right now, but everybody at the field and local staff level have no concept of how it's going to be spent. And so you're going to have to stay tenacious in working with people to get them to the understanding of where you are and how you'd like to spend this money. So those things get elevated up the food chain. We had a natural advantage in this because we were already talking with some of those people higher up in the food chain in some of our agencies. And federal screening is one of those where we are working to bring that back so that it reduces how much we have to spend on equipment.
Can you explain that to the new board members?
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay,
I was gonna
all right.
ask. These guys don't know, is that a screen on a door or what?
Federal screening is the ability of a federal contractor, federal government employee, federal agency to access federal equipment, federal property, in a manner that basically makes it low cost, no cost sometimes. So basically, they have these huge yards of equipment all throughout the country, and yours you were going to is in Salt Lake. But what they'll do is when we, for example, when we go to war, they'll ramp up production on certain types of equipment. And then when they come back, they have just thousands of acres of this property just sitting there. Backhoes, excavators, all kinds of stuff we could use. Sometimes it's stuff we can't use, road graders, whatever they use to go over, build whole cities where their army troops are going to survive and then come back. They also do it occasionally by just surplusing their own property. Property that the federal government thinks is old, outdated, and unusable is usually our gem here at EBID because it's about 4 or 5 years old. It's low on time, but boy, is it out of date, right? So those are the kinds of things that Gary, when he had federal screening, could go and just show his ID card and say, point and click, right? I have money for these things and I'm taking all these excavators or backhoes or trucks, computers, you name it, fax machines, whatever the case may be, office equipment, all the way to construction, you name it. When we got into the litigation over the operating agreement, Gary was sent a letter from the federal government saying, well, we don't think you have this authority anymore under random obscure provisions of policy that they have in place. Sorry, you no longer qualified. Well, what we did was we went back to them and said, can you just take one more look at your policy for a second? Are you sure we don't qualify? Because, for example, the federal government is insisting that farmers do more with less. And to the point that now they're even saying, as long as you can do the same with less, we're happy with you. So every year, though, they're going to send you a bill for all of their operating costs for the reservoir, for the dams. They're still pumping out those bills, but they're expecting us to do more or the same with far less than we used to have. So then they say, we're going to give you a ton of money for fallowing. And we're talking to them in terms of, are you sure fallowing is actually going to help us? Are you sure demanding more of us during these times is actually going to help us? Aren't there other policy changes you could make internally that might help us more? Like, for example, making it easier and cheaper for us to get the property and equipment we need to do the maintenance we need to do might allow us to hire more people within our current budget to do more maintenance, though, than we're currently doing. And they kind of went, oh, good point. We will relook at our policies, starting with federal screening. So again, though, they keep telling us you have to be tenacious, you have to stay on top of us because these local employees have more work than they've ever had before, and there are no rules for a lot of what they're supposed to be doing. Nobody knows if the money is supposed to go through this channel or that channel or how to navigate various different contracts or agreements that are in place. So I think, Gary, to answer your question, we need to follow up. But my understanding is that they have agreed to give us our federal screening back along with others. And so again, EBID on the cutting edge of something. We led that charge and they supposedly are in the process of changing their policy. Just takes time.
Questions on federal screening. It is an important item for us in reducing our capital asset costs. Thank you. Please continue.
And then for item D, you have some talking points in front of you to shorten the meeting. Generally speaking, those are confidential. They relate more to ongoing issues in Texas versus New Mexico than the Rio Grande Compact Commission meeting. As a general matter, Compact Commission meeting occurred in April, same week that we were in DC. And my guess is we will probably just cover that in Texas v. New Mexico. Mr. President, do you have any issues with deferring the conversation?
I don't. I'll just state broadly. So the Rio Grande Compact Commission meeting, we attend that every year. One one of the most important things we do is either our district or the El Paso district hosts the other for dinner the night before the compact commission meeting. It's an important opportunity for us to get together in a non-adversarial setting. And remember that we're all humans. We're all trying to get through the same problems together. It tends to improve the tone of our meetings afterwards, where we have hard asks at each other. So continuing to do that, in my opinion, is important to actually getting to good solutions as opposed to simply trying to spite each other.
And my understanding is that dinner went well and the meeting otherwise went according to what we expected.
So thank you very much, Ms. Salbeck. That concludes the legal update. We're gonna check. I think so. Like, it's about that time. Any other comments or questions from the board before I ask to recess for lunch? You're not accept a motion to recess for lunch. I have a motion by Frank Paul Salbeck, second by Mr. Nunez to recess for lunch. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. We are at recess.
Yeah, we're good. And two trucks show up. But anyway, we won't go to this.
Only 4 minutes over.
What state is that?
Well, no.